Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hi.
Josh, my friend, I'm going to open up a big old can of worms in regards to performance versus resolution, but we'll get there in a bit because Eurogamer Portugal have been talking to Ubisoft and they've obtained a quote in regards to how Assassin's Creed Valhalla is going to run on the Xbox Series X. And the quote reads that currently, this is on Ubisoft's side, we can guarantee that Assassin's Creed Valhalla will run at least 30 frames a second, which we'll get back to that. They said that the game will benefit from faster loading times, allowing players to immerse themselves in history and the world without friction, which is one of the best PR spins on a loading time ever. Also said that Valhalla will benefit from improved graphics made possible by the Xbox Series X, and they can't wait to show everything off in 4K. But this 30 frames a second thing is what's blowing up all over Google and Twitter and social media and everything in general, because obviously the Series X is meant to be the world's most powerful console, and going into the next generation, we assumedly expect 60 frames a second to be the standard, which if their minimum is 30, then that's already kind of what we have right now.
Well, yeah, honestly, man, when you came to me this morning, you said, Josh, have you seen the Assassin's Creed controversy? I was like, what controversy? Then you explained it to me. And I know 2020 has been weird so far, right? But I didn't expect to travel back in time to 2013, you know what I mean? Because these are the exact same conversations that we were having at the start of the last generation when those new machines, the PlayStation 4 and the original Xbox One, couldn't hit 1080p 60 frames per second at launch, you know what I mean? Like, that's what everyone was expecting. And obviously it didn't happen, but this time around, like you said, the Xbox Series X has been sold on the idea, the pie in the sky idea that everything will be 4K running at 60 frames per second, and if one of the first games doesn't hit that, obviously it doesn't really set it up quite well. But to be honest, I'm trying to like parse this out, because everyone is kind of like approaching it like it's this massive deal, but was this not to be expected? Because even in the quote itself, they say that it's currently at least going to be 30 frames per second, which means they could optimize it even more in time for release and perhaps bump it up a little bit, or bump it up depending on which console you play or whatever. So it's like, to me, it's not them saying what we're aiming for is 4K 30 frames per second. It's just that that's where it is right now.
Oh yeah, it's I don't know, because I think what sticks out, and I'm not on this controversial thing. I don't know. I am such a console peasant and have been for my entire life that, to be honest, I barely see the difference between 30 and 60 frames a second. It's kind of got to be, I've got to flick between them on the settings and then go back to it and go, I think that one's a little bit smoother. But I always go down, when games give you the option, like I'm playing through Last of Us Remastered at the minute, and it's like resolution or performance. I just go with resolution anyway, because I want more detail, or at least in my console peasant brain, that's what I'm aiming for. But I think a lot of the controversy in this particular case, it comes from the fact that like all the marketing for the Xbox Series X and obviously the PS5 as well is talking about this brand new 4K HDR 60 FPS feature, and those numbers get sort of, everything is this giant maelstrom of expectation and potential, especially in regards to things like the Mark Cerny breakdown, or when they have shown other trailers that have said 60 FPS or we're aiming for 60 FPS. I guess people just didn't want someone like Ubisoft to come out and say, well, our minimum is 30. I guess they wanted a minimum of something higher, like a 45 or a 60. I don't know, where do you come down on the performance versus resolution thing though?
For me, it's literally a game-by-game basis, you know what I mean? I do think it's a bit foolhardy for the big console manufacturers to go all in on resolution and treat that like it's, the only important factor, when I really, for me, it depends on the game whether I prioritize resolution or prioritize frame rate. Because unlike you, when I go back and play The Last of Us Remastered, I actually prioritize the frame rate because I think it runs much smoother in combat when you have it.
What about the detail though, mate? What about the little... you never know what's there.
It's lovely, but also whacking zombies in 60 frames per second is also lovely because it's buttery smooth, and going straight through a clicker's noggin with a baseball bat feels really good. But yeah, to me, like when it comes to this controversy, I feel like we're going through a cycle. We're just repeating the past because these are the exact same conversations that we were having back in the day, and I don't think it's entirely unexpected to see a launch game for the next generation systems that's also releasing on the older systems to not fulfill the true potential of the next gen hardware. Like that's never happened in the history of consoles. You know what I mean? If you're not an exclusive only to like the new machines, and you're from one of the first parties, there's a good chance you're going to have to accommodate the old machines and then optimize your game for a bunch of different platforms, which is hard work. And we've seen so many developers crash and burn doing that. Battlefield 4, for instance, that released bunch, like that was a cross-gen game, and that absolutely tanked because of it. Like the servers were broken at launch, everything was going tits up. It's hard.
Never actually fixed it, that game.
They never actually fix it. It's hard to make a really good launch game, and it's even harder to thread the needle of maximizing the potential of the new machines while also catering to the install base that have a lesser technological kind of edge.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I think sticks out in this case, and it's interesting because it's like, I remember when Sony announced the PS4 Pro, like the half-step system, and it was like, okay, how do you, and they said like no exclusive features are going to be on the Pro, which is kind of complete balls, because obviously there's a whole list of games that render things differently on Pro. I mean, something like Abzu will give you more fish and different NPCs and things in the background that aren't available on the regular version. But it reminds me of that sort of like, in an era with diminishing returns in console hardware, how do you then advertise that stuff whilst also placating the people that just bought a new system as of a couple of years ago? The Pro was in 2017, but at the same time, like with this, it's like, how the hell do you market this thing when on the Xbox side they've been out there saying like, well, everything's going to be backwards compatible, like AC Valhalla, you can play that on Xbox One anyway. How do you sort of create a feature set that it's going to make you want to play it on the SX that doesn't invalidate the fact that people the Xbox One X isn't that old, and the half-step systems aren't that old. Like, I mean, all the one thing they've put out here is loading times, which that's not going to make that many people upgrade. Like the fact that you can jump in a bit faster, I don't know if it's enough.
Well, to be honest, it's a difficult one, because I do feel like the next generation, like we mentioned in the podcast we did yesterday, is going to be defined by more than just resolution and frame rate. That's what people attach to because it's quite familiar. Like there are going to be like the increases in the load speeds. That's going to have like a knock-on effect that kind of changes the way the game is played. It might be a selling point upon it into itself, but the big issue I have with this is, and it comes down to like the publishers and the developers, is how they've marketed resolution and frame rate in the past. Like you mentioned the half-step systems there. Both the PlayStation 4 Pro and the Xbox One X are marketed on being 4K machines, but that's not entirely true, because the PlayStation 4 Pro renders very little in native 4K, and even the Xbox One X, that doesn't render like everything in native 4K. Yeah, it's like Red Dead 2. It's a choice selection of games. It's still pretty good. But because the 4K moniker has been attached to those machines for so long, a lot of people are just don't find 4K impressive anymore, because it's been appeared to have been implemented in a bunch of different games for a bunch of different years so far. So when you're going into the next kind of console generation and you're saying that these games are going to be rendered in native 4K, but they're only going to be 30 frames per second, you do get people saying, well, isn't that exactly what we had on the last generation? And that's not entirely true, but from a marketing standpoint, it absolutely is, because you're using the same words and the same phrases to sell this new machine, and you're not making it clear what advantage one has over the other. So it's very confusing, and I think we've got that over this past generation so much with the likes of, the Mark Cerny SSD talk, HDR, 4K, native 4K, the world's most powerful console, teraflops. They are marketing buzzwords that are so often misused that they lead to controversies like this that perhaps shouldn't necessarily be controversies.
True. I mean, honestly, like the marketing buzzword side of it, like the amount of variations that we've had on like Ultra HD, Full HD, Premium HD, like all these different things. Even the term HD remaster, where we surpassed HD like years ago, and now it's like this sort of, like I said, this weird sort of blur of like 4K, 8K, the next generation, 100. Like this is the thing. Part of the Xbox Series X blur, but another part that's kind of why people are getting attached to, why they're annoyed about this 30 FPS thing, is that on Microsoft's official, the little blurb that goes alongside the Xbox Series X enhanced, there's a little paragraph that they tag on to like every single game that has that enhanced by SX thing, and it says up to 120 frames a second. Obviously it's up to, and they want to kind of give those, all they can do is put out the potential maximum, like it's on the developer side to to actually make it work. But that whole thing about frame rates, I mean, for me that was such a PC centric conversation beforehand, and and I was kind of being a bit like facetious before in terms of like, I can tell tell the difference, but I don't hang a whole game's enjoyment on it. But do you think that's like something that I guess going forward is just going to become more part of the mainstream conversation around gaming? Like just the average person will know way more about frame rates?
I think so, but I think it'll only be relevant for the start of the generation. It's like, again, going back to the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, the big differentiator between the two at the time was whether or not they could render games in 1080p natively, or if they could run it at 60 or 30. And we saw that dominate the conversation at launch as to which console was better. Like, it was all of their different differences and nuances were boiled down to whether or not they could hit a certain resolution or they could hit a certain frame rate. But we don't really talk about that much anymore. When a new game comes out on both these machines now, for the most part, that news gets buried. It's still there, obviously. People obviously care about it, but it's not right in the zeitgeist, right in the mainstream as it was at the start of the generation. I do think we'll see that here, where, you know, we see that a new game is not going to hit 4K 60 frames per second, and then that will dominate the discourse for a little bit and make us worry whether or not the machines are going to be worth it or whatever. Then the cycle will repeat itself. Don't get me wrong, I do think it's going to be a major misstep if Microsoft promises 4K 60 frames per second as a baseline or a goal, and they don't hit it as the generation goes on. But for me, one single game that is cross-gen, that is coming out at launch, saying that it's currently only at a minimum of 30 frames per second at 4K isn't the end of the world. To me, that's to be expected, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and literally, considering how long Assassin's Creed's been running, I remember this exact conversation happening with Black Flag, because that was the cross-generation game back in late 2013. But yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see how it goes. I think in terms of Microsoft on their first-party side, Halo Infinite should be their big, glossy 120 frames a second thing. And I guess it's on third parties to try and appease the people who have bought the previous consoles, or, you know, even have the ones from back in 2013. You know, it's going to be on them to try and cover all bases, whereas the actual console manufacturers can... the onus is, like you said, is way more on Microsoft rather than just one game. But yeah, let us know what you think down in the comments below of the general frame rate debate. Where do you come down on performance versus resolution? And what do you think of Assassin's Creed Valhalla potentially only running in 30 frames a second? For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
I'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.